But we are going to wrap up, and it's a big section today. Really big section. So if you have your Bibles, open up, because we're going to cover a lot. Go to Matthew chapter 7, and we are going to go through 13 to the very end of this chapter. It's a lot, okay? Don't be too alarmed. I think there's a really clear thread here that runs through all these verses, and we're going to tie them all together because Jesus is going to move us towards this wrap-up, this difficulty of this discipline, this discipled life, and the dangers that come our way as followers of Christ if we don't keep ourselves fixed upon Him as this ultimate goal. So I'm going to read 13 through 29, and then we're going to get into it. Ready? Here we go. Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But the gate is small, but small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only few will find it. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, and bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, and thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of the Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and drive out demons in your name and perform so many miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds their house on the rock. And the rain came down, the streams rose, the wind blew and beat against that house, but it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds their house on the sand. And the rain came down, the streams rise, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and with a great crash, it fell. I want to begin with a quote from Lewis Carroll, the person who wrote Alice in Wonderland, and it's said by the Cheshire Cat. I think it's one of the greatest little quotes of all time. And it's this: if you don't know where you're going, then any road will get you there. You know that? You've heard this quote before, yeah? If you don't know where you're going, then any road will get you there. It was not adapted well into the animated movie, sadly. She asks, how do I get somewhere? And the Cheshire Cat says, well, where are you going? And I think any road can find you to where you're ending up. It's not as translated. But the original, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will get you there. I think one of the biggest needs for the church, for disciples, for all of us today, is direction. If Jesus is the way and the goal, then we have to begin to discover that wherever Jesus is, that's where we begin as disciples of Christ. And one of the big challenges we often have is this misunderstanding of balancing both grace and salvation by faith in Jesus alone, this call to obedience in the kingdom. I think this is a big challenge, and it's what this thread drives together through here. How do we actually determine what is the right way and what door should we go through? What foundation are our decisions being built upon? Is it true or is it not true? And how do I even know if what I'm doing is true? And I think one of the most central, the central passage in this is one of the most terrifying little couple of scriptures in the whole of the Bible. How do I even know that I know Jesus? We'll get to what I think Karl Barth talks about. We'll get there. But I think it's terribly frightening. So clearly the people in this little section, this frightening one, know him. They think they're doing all these right things on their behalf. But he says, I never knew you. And this can create a lot of discomfort, because Jesus in his teaching knows exactly what he knows exactly what he's doing, right? I've said this all the time. He's a really good teacher. He knew what Lewis Carroll had said was true. If you don't know where you're going to go, then any way will get you there. If you don't know where you're going, any path finds you that place. And that's the reality all around us. Too often, this section particularly, whenever it's taught, is taught in like an evangelical sort of statement. It's this evangelical sermon. And this is the driving point. You know, all Scripture is God-breathed, and all the points, to Jesus, and this declares the beauty of the gospel. But I don't think this is the primary thrust of this text about who's saved and who's not saved. It's not there's two doors and some will be saved and some are not. This isn't the primary thrust of this text. The primary idea that connects this as you draw all these threads together is that there are dangers before disciples. If you look at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, it says Jesus sees the crowd. He goes up on a mountain and he's seated, and all of them came around him, and he opened his mouth and he starts teaching to them. This is the thrust of the whole Sermon on the Mount. It's engaging with the disciples and the people there to learn from him. And he opened with this idea of the ethics of the kingdom. What does it look like to live in accordance with the kingdom? The heartbeat of what it means to be confronted with the gospel of grace. And then he grabs a hold of everybody, and you have this vision of the living Christ. And it creates not only a love for God, but this need for this new kind of sacrificial love for one another. If you had to summarize the whole Sermon on the Mount, and that's what you would get. That this is this compelling evidence that the world is lost and it's looking for light. And our right beliefs are completely essential to understanding that. But he ends here by saying, if that doesn't translate itself to a life well lived in a sacrificial way, if you don't have that, then you run the risk of finding yourself off track. And we've seen that again and again in the Christian life. Lots of people, you close your eyes and just think about them, that make genuine declarations about Jesus, genuine declarations about dependence on him. I know many people that have come to this place and they proclaim Jesus as Lord. They believe in their hearts that God raised him, that he was raised from the dead, that he's really the king of the whole universe. They've given themselves over. They've found real salvation. And then they fall into the trappings of what this passage is about, of losing sight of that first love, and they end up walking sideways. There's a many who declare that it's, theologically, I'm in school right now again, and I'm in seminary. We've had endless arguments about this exact thing. There's lots of people who I'm friends with that would say a genuine declaration of Jesus means it's not possible to be rebellious anymore. But I've read the book of Corinthians, so I've read that one. And I'd say that so much of Scripture is constantly dealing with the realities that there are multiple doors around us that Christians go in all the time. On one side, a door of legalism, right? And on the other side, carnality, for any other better way to put it. And we can't find which door we're supposed to go in because we lose sight, right? We forget what Jesus has been talking about this whole time. We lose sight of this means of discipleship. So the gospel is a gift. It's freely given. You have to freely receive it. But with that idea, with what Jesus is talking about, freely receiving this, there comes an actual frightening thing that comes with it. Are you ready for this? This is a frightening word. I want you to repeat it after me. This is a scary word. We're going to talk about why it's scary. Ready? You receive the gospel and you're given something and it becomes scary. Ready? Freedom. Go ahead, say it. Freedom. That's a scary word. Because the moment you become free, the moment you say, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna make a decision, we're gonna do this thing, you become responsible with what happens. When you're a kid and you're told to go do something and it breaks, it's not your fault. Your parents told you to do that. You with me? But if you make that decision, suddenly the consequences are your own. Before you knew Jesus, he talks all this time, you were dead to sin, right? All these things. You didn't have freedom. You didn't really have it. You were stuck. You were feet in the mud. But this freedom through Jesus creates responsibility. And it creates this difficulty that he's talking about at the very end. I have real choices. I can choose to cling to Christ or I can lose sight. I can start to wander sideways. This passage is essentially not actually that difficult to understand. I can know Jesus, I can believe in Jesus, and love Jesus, but it doesn't mean that it's now going to be easy to stand up and do the right thing repeatedly over and over to make sure I'm constantly aimed in the right direction. That requires absolute disciplining of your devotion and having a central passion and heart be Jesus. That his kingdom coming would be the defining element of everything that you do. That's hard. And this is where discipleship, this is where this evangelical message behind this goes completely wrong. This is where I think everybody makes a left turn in this scripture and they miss the driving point. Salvation should be the easiest thing somebody ever does, when you really think about it. If you really get to this thing, you come to a place of brokenness and you cast yourself on dependence of a loving God who's willing to receive you in the condition that you're in and put him at the center. But the challenge of it is in the actual discipleship. It's in the thing that comes after that becomes difficult. The sanctified life, as the Wesleyans call it, a life of holiness. Growing into maturity, learning to walk by faith. It's this discipline that requires daily recognition. I need Jesus today like I needed him yesterday, and I'll need him tomorrow. And admitting that over and over and over. But the problem is the inclination of the human heart. The inclination of the human spirit and the drive is to become independent over and over and over again. And because of this, Jesus ends his passage this way. He says, listen, you've got to enter through a really narrow gate. And the path that leads you to it isn't very wide either. Because the broad road and the big gate that leads to destruction is easy to find. But the small and narrow gate that leads to life, only few are going to actually find this. He says, first of all, you have to understand something simple. And once I say this, you'll go, huh, yeah. The path of least resistance, the easiest one to do, is not the path that leads to the narrow gate. It's a pretty simple little message he puts forward. Malcolm Muggeridge, theologian, says that only dead fish swim with the current. I like that. Just dead fishes go where the current takes them. To go against the tide and the age of the world that we live in, to recognize that anything in life is worth doing and having requires a huge amount of discipline and effort and focus. The greatest things you can enjoy in life require the absolute most discipline to achieve them. I like movies. I used to, before I had children, I would go to the movies all the time. Ashley bought me for Valentine's Day one year, she bought me Movie Pass. Do you remember Movie Pass? Do you guys remember this? Do I have to re-explain? Do you know it? Okay. Movie Pass was like Netflix for movie theaters. You paid a monthly fee, and you could go to as many movies in the movie theater as you wanted. You would just flash your Movie Pass card, and they printed you a ticket. It was amazing. I worked on homework watching movies. I would just go into Bones, and I'd go, Chris, I'm watching a movie today, and I'd sit in the back row by myself, and I would work on homework. Because I'm going to get my money's worth. You with me? I loved it. They're out of business now. Shocking that unlimited movies for a monthly fee doesn't work over time. I love movies. I used to go all the time. Now I have 2 girls. I don't even know the last time I went into a movie theater to watch a movie because by the time movies start playing, it's bedtime and I'm exhausted. And so we watch a lot of movies at home. But the best part about a movie theater is the popcorn. They do something special with popcorn at a movie theater. I don't know how they make it. You can't do it at home. It's a unique thing. But I would get a bucket of popcorn because I had a Bones bucket, and I could get it for like $2.99 or whatever. It was the greatest deal on the whole planet. And I would get a Coke. This is back still when I drank real Coke. And I'd get a big bucket of popcorn, and then you're trapped inside of a movie theater. Do you know this feeling? You're sitting, you got the popcorn, you got napkins, you got all, and you're ready. Like you're in the zone, and you're just huffing down popcorn, and you're like, drink it all down. You get halfway through the bucket, and you're not even through the previews yet. And you're like, well, I might as well refill it. And then by the time the movie's over, you're through 2 gallons of soda, and you've eaten at least 500 kernels of popcorn that's soaked in that whatever it is they put on it. They call it butter. We all know that's not what it is, right? And your tummy's rumbling. Are you with me? You've been in this situation before, and there's grease stains on your shirt. It's fantastic. That is the path of least resistance. You with me? That is the path of absolute least resistance. You're trapped in that movie theater, and you're going to give them all this money to watch a movie, and you're going to pay them for popcorn. It's a $4 bucket of popcorn. It costs them less than a half penny to make that much popcorn. And you go in this dark room, and it's just a terribly healthy environment. Your shoes stick to the ground. You're eating buckets of synthetic oils all over popcorn, and you're drinking the Coke, and it feels so good in the moment. You with me? Now, what happens when you get home from that adventure in the movie theater, and you get home finally, and what do you realize? Your tummy doesn't feel so good, does it? Once you're through half a bucket of popcorn, you've decided how your evening is going. You've made your decision. You're blinded by the daylight. I always think of this too. You leave a movie if you go and it's still sunny out in the summer because the sun doesn't set till 1 in the morning in the summer in Indiana. And you leave and you've been in a dark room and the sun blinds your eyes and you look and you realize there's stains on your shirt from the popcorn and your shoes are still sticking to the pavement and realization sits all of a sudden. So I gave up soda a long time ago, sugared soda. I used to drink, a Coke, a 12-ounce can of Coke a day, easy. And the best were the ones that were made with real sugar. Jones Soda, which is fantastic. So every Christmas, my mom used to get me a mix of random real cane sugar sodas, and they're so good. I drank so much soda, and my doctor looked at me one time after telling me, your cholesterol's high, and you could probably stand to not. Do you want to have diabetes? That was what they said to me one time. She said, do you want to have diabetes? I said, I don't think I want to have diabetes. She goes, I might suggest making a few changes in your life. And so I gave up sugared soda. I gave up all this stuff. And let me tell you something, that's hard. Because the path of least resistance is just like cholesterol, diabetes, schmolesterol. I'm going to eat popcorn, red meat steaks, and I'm going to drink pop because it feels good. And it took me a long time to get over needing to have a Coke every single day. Now, I substituted it with zero sugar soda because I found out that's perfectly fine. You can do that. That's good. They'll discover in 10 years that secretly is doing something. But right now, it's good. But for a long time, I was drinking just water, and that's all I was on, and it was hard. I hate water. But that's the hardest things in life are the things that are probably the most worth doing. And you know why I did it? Because I was like, you know what? I would like to be old enough and healthy enough to see my daughters have children. It's worth doing. It was hard. We have a desire to do a lot of really great things, but sometimes we don't have that determination to do the things that we should. We don't have the discipline. Because things are either good and easy or hard and worthwhile. And Jesus understands that to be the disciple, to be someone that puts all this in him, to follow him, that allows Jesus' voice to be the supreme thing in their life, this driving passion in their life, to come to this place where you enter into the difficult pleasure of purging all of those desires, to get rid of those things and redirect all those things in our lives to become a force by which God's kingdom can come forth is hard. And I would make the argument that most Christians don't ever do that. This is what he's talking about here. I know tons of Christians who love Jesus, they know Jesus, they've allowed him to be all these things, but they've lost their way. They entered through the wrong gate a lot. They went to the path of least resistance. They stopped disciplining themselves towards the thing that gave them life. They forgot what it is they really loved. You don't have to think too hard to click on the news and see pastors do this all the time. This is not about just who's saved and who's not. Because the vast majority of Christians really do live with saved souls. They've got it, but they have completely wasted lives. Because their ideal of Christianity is this instantaneous Christianity that says, I just want my ticket to be safe from whatever's coming next, but I want to live however I want to live. And that's faulty framework. Notice what he says. I think this is so good. I'm going to ask a question. Okay, ready? I'm going to read this. I'm going to ask you a question. Okay. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gates and broad are the roads that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life. How narrow is the gate he's talking about? How narrow is it? It's kind of in there. If you read it doesn't translate to English well, but if you read it in Greek, you can pick it up. How narrow is it? Does anyone have any idea? How narrow are we talking here? Okay, ready for this? This is hidden in the Greek in there. You ready for this? It's singular. How narrow is it? There's just one. There's just one. This is the exclusivity. There's a proclamation, right, that all paths will lead to God, right? We live in a time, right? Whatever you do, you want to be a disciple, look to the threads. The church is, they're folding under all this other stuff to confront it. But how narrow is the actual gate Jesus is talking about? It's singular. The other ones, there's options. In the Greek, there's multiple others, wide gates. It's in a weird. Anyway, moving on. There's many of them. There's just one. It's singular. All these other options, all these doors. You can go in one religion and you'll earn your way by your own effort. Then you got the other side where you just do whatever it is that you want. But Jesus in Matthew, right, he's saying, entering in the narrow gate, the most difficult way. There's just one. There's a single one. Christianity is not an ideology that we follow. This is where people fall off all the time. Christianity is not an ideology. Everyone put this in your brain and then it's going to make sense when I say it. We're going to say it out loud. Christianity is not an ideology that we follow. You with me? Is not an ideology that we follow. Okay? We don't follow an ideology at all. It's not an ambitious belief system that's driven by like-minded people that hang out together and figure it out. We gather around Jesus. We don't follow an ideology. We follow a person. You with me? That's what we follow. The exclusivity of Christ is the key to this idea. Because the world might declare everything is good, and no one's happy, and no one's satisfied, because broad is the path, and many are the gates that lead to decay and atrophy. The path of least resistance. If you do it with your physical body and it starts to fall apart, you can do it with your spiritual life, and the same thing happens. Jesus is the way. We don't follow an ideology. We follow a person. No one comes to the Father except through Him. And in a world that's filled with these beliefs that ultimately all things will lead to God, all paths might ultimately lead to Jesus. They might all do it. All paths are going to lead to Him eventually. It's true. Not all paths lead to the same destination and conversation with Him. For some, they will come to Jesus and discover Him as a judge. Others will come and discover Him as a Savior, because He is both of these things. Jesus talks in a really singular and exclusive fashion, but it's an inclusive invitation. The Creator of the heavens, the earth, made us in His image. He sent His Son to bring restoration to that image for broken humanity alone. We enter into this plethora of ways, right? There's only one way back to Eden, right? There's a million ways to not get there, but there's only the one gate that leads us to life, and all these other doors that don't. They may be easier access, they may be much broader, but Jesus comes to each person as if you're the only person this road is built for. And He says, you've got this restrictive narrowness to enter through, but in that we find the freedom. Jesus alone enters into the broken story of the world and says, I'll make my brokenness I'll make your brokenness my own, so that you can become free. And this is this thread. I want to see this traced through. Okay, here we go. False paths lead you to other paths of even greater brokenness. This is this thread we're gonna weave through here. So he goes through. He says false paths, and then he moves right into the next one, which is false teaching. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. You'll forget to recognize them as you can fruit grow on whatever. Okay. He goes to the false paths, right into false teaching, and the moment you start to drift from who Jesus is, that you start walking sideways, the moment you stop making that path and Him the center, that's when you become open and prone to the next batch of verses. Being persuaded by false teaching. And this is what I want you to see here. Okay, the moment you enter the path of least resistance, the moment you buy into the lies of all these things that tells us that God's here, He's on this path too. It's the moment you drift, it spirals more and more and more and more. I mean, how many false teachers have entered into a public sphere and brought ginormous damage? I'm not a person who names names from the pulpit, but I watch them. I'll pull up people, I'll watch, that profess great preaching, or they're pinnacles of the Christian faith, or they're stewards of whatever. You can, I'll watch, and they're everywhere. Here's what I say this, I've said this so many times, I just try to reiterate this over and over. I'm no better than any of you. Okay, I'm no better than any of you. Okay, the minute I start to think I'm better than you, y'all can take a vote and fire me. That's the power you hold. I'm no better than any of you. When I was doing seminary, I do this thing. I'm very self-deprecating in preaching. I like to involve myself in it a lot, in a bad way. I usually make myself the doofus of the story in preaching, which is fine. I enjoy doing that. And I did this in seminary in my doctoral work, and after like 2 sermons of it, one of my professors goes, I just want everyone in here to realize you shouldn't try to do that, because it can come off really disingenuous. But some people have cultivated being a doofus their whole life, like Phil has, and it's okay. People are like, yeah, he's kind of weird. But here's what I say all the time. I'm no better than you, okay? I try to be the person that you see here, if you were to kick my door down and see me acting in my house with my family, you would see the same person. You with me? I don't try to be something I'm not up here. That's why I bury myself in sermons with you a lot. I'll bury myself with you. Because the path of least resistance is easy, guys. I walk down it. You with me? I try to be the same person. And he says, you'll know the false teachers and the real ones by their fruit. This is why you should be concerned if all of a sudden I'm not around anymore to be observed whether or not I'm fruitful or not. This is why we live life together. He goes on to say, and I think this is the most terrifying thing, to drift from the path, to lose our way, to go down the wrong door, to come under teaching that actually leads us even further from Jesus, leads us to our next false thing, which is false assumptions. False teachers will lead people to false assumptions. And these two verses, I think, are the scariest verses in the entire Bible. Are you ready for this? I think these are frightening. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will come to me on that day and say, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and drive out demons and perform miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, evildoer. False teaching, false assumptions. They know Jesus is Lord. They call him Lord. They think they know who he is. They do things in his name. They're prophesying. They said, hey, we did this. We drove out demons in your name. We got power over spiritual domains. We did miracles. We did signs. We performed wonders in your names. All of these things were done for you. And they seem to be aware of who Jesus is. And Jesus tells them, and this is the Greek again, I'll be very clear. I'll tell them plainly. I'll be as clear as my words can be. I never knew you. Orthodoxy, that's having the right knowledge. Orthodoxy is not a guarantee of anything. The devil's orthodox in classical Christian teaching. You see it in Mark, where the possessed people say, like, you're Jesus, the Son of God. And he's like, quiet. They know it. It's possible to be used by God and not be right. He can use broken vessels and cause the kingdom to go forth. How much more could he use us if we actually pursued holiness and gave ourselves to Jesus in a real way? The reason these people enter into this destiny, Karl Barth, who's a theologian, absolute genius, he calls this section, he calls it the powerful unknowing God. Because we've got a God that knows absolutely everything, omniscient, there's just all knowledge. And he says, I don't even know you. The way that you live is so contrary to everything I am that you might as well not even exist. I have no knowledge of you. I have no relationship with you. You did things in my name. I even worked through some of those things. But as for you, I don't know you. And if you knew me, you wouldn't be telling me all the things you did. And that's the key to understanding this little section of this text, right? In case you're fearful, right? Because I read this and I go, woo, am I that person? Holy crap, right? Is that me? I serve Jesus, right? What if he says, I don't know you? Here's the promise. If you know Jesus, you're not going to stand before him and say, check out all this cool stuff I did for you. Wherever Jesus is, that's where the good door is found. Wherever Jesus is where nourishment and power is. And that's how you move forward. False assumptions from false practices not hinged upon any real personhood of Jesus. But we have to be a church that believes that Jesus is really with us, right? That we're not working towards some victory in Jesus in the future, but that we are working from a victory that has already been achieved. We've got to see that this false assumption leads to the absolute root of the whole problem, which is false doors to false teaching to false assumptions, which leads to false foundations. I couldn't think of a better way to faulty foundations maybe would have been more alliterative. When you see a foundation in an old house, one of the things that's funny is if there's If there's problems with the foundation, there might not be a revelation of that in the basement. You might not see it in there. But you might see it on the upper stories. Have you ever been in a house where you're like, why is there a big old crack on the third floor? It's like, because the foundation's all kilter-walkered downstairs. You with me? It reveals itself in these upper stories. Things get out of plumb, right? The cracks start to appear in the ceiling because the walls and the foundations are all tilty world. You with me? And so that you see the bad foundation will lead to all this broken spots in other locations. But you can't miss this. The foundation is the problem. The foundation's the problem. You can patch the cracks in the walls, but the reality is that the faulty foundation leads to those cracks over and over. Matthew 7:24 through 29. The last verses we will ever read out of Matthew for a long time. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine will put them into practice. Like a wise man who builds their house on the rock, the rains come, the streams rise, and the wind blows and beats, but the house remains standing because its foundation is built on rock. But you hear them, and you put them into practice, but don't put them into practice like a foolish man who builds their house on a sand. And when the rains come and the streams rise, the winds blow and beat against the house, and with it goes a great crash. When he finished those teachings, the crowds were amazed because he taught as one with authority, not as a teacher of the law. He's distinguishing this real faith here. Real faith is not defined by hearing and believing that what he says is true. Real faith is defined by a faith that actually works. Paul writes to the church in Thessalonica, and he says, I'm so happy that I appraise you. You're doing so good with the work of faiths, that your faith is actually doing something. Way to go, Thessalonica. You're doing something. Jesus says, you haven't really believed in me, and so you've allowed me to be the foundation of your whole life. It's not enough that you read the Bible and that you pray and you do all sorts of things in my name. What you need is a full dependence on my personhood, to build your life completely from my foundation alone. Hear me say it, and that you trusted me. The image that he uses several times in other scriptures is the idea of having an anchor in the deep waters to keep you set. May we hear Jesus and set him as our anchor, the foundation, to build everything up upon. This is the challenge that he ends the Sermon on the Mount with.